Hello and welcome to the show. It is April 7th, 2022. Let me start by saying that I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. This information is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. Today I'll be going over rules 10, 11, and 12. And I'll be showing some price action on stock symbols MMTLP and MMAT, CEI, and GME. Those are MetaMaterials Torchlight Preferred Shares, MetaMaterials, Camber Energy, and GameStop. So let's start. These are some rules I've been going over. These are my personal rules. In the last two videos, I've gone over the rules in red and the rules in yellow. And today I'll be going over the rules in white. This would be the rules 10, 11, and 12. And again, these are my own rules. Maybe you'll find them interesting. Maybe you won't. I don't know. Everyone's different. But I keep these rules for my own sanity. So let me just go over what the rules are themselves. Rule 1, never invest more than you can afford to lose. These are relatively obvious rules. Rule 2, know your investment, or better yet, know why you're investing in a particular venture. Rule 3, know your risks. Suppose you're wrong. Okay, gotta understand that. Rule 4, understand your upside and downside potential and some reasonable targets, as well as time frames. What are your expected earnings, expected price targets, etc. Rule 5, every buyer has a seller. Understand who's on the other side of your investment, and why did they do the opposite. Rule 6, don't FOMO or panic, but recognize FOMO and blood in the streets. Rule 7, consider buying when there is blood in the streets, even if it's your own. Rule 8, listen to the media. They'll usually tell you what not to do. Rule 9, there are 3 directions it can go: up, down, and sideways. Do you have a plan for all 3? And finally, rules 10, 11, and 12, which we'll be going over in this video. Understand exponentials and plan for them. Always keep a little cash on the side, because you never know when you might get some amazing opportunities. And rule 12, everything is supply and demand. So let's start with rule 10. Understand exponentials and plan for them. Okay? Maybe you've heard the term exponential, maybe you haven't. I'll give you some examples of exponentials in real life. The ones most people are familiar with are compound interest. Population growth is also considered an exponential, as well as possibly the money supply. And as a corollary, there's U.S. congressional expenditures. They seem to be increasing beyond all possible expectations. So let's start with compound interest. Okay. To understand compound interest, you have to first understand simple interest. So with simple interest, you've got principal. That's the money you're investing, and you've got an interest rate. Let's just say it's 10%. So if you invest $1 at 10%, you'll make an interest of 10 cents. Right? 10% of $1 is 10 cents. Compound interest is simply taking the interest and the principal and then reinvesting it for another round. Okay. So in the previous example, you had 10 cents of interest. If you take that 10 cents, add it back to the dollar, now you've got $1.10, and you invest that back for another round, right, at 10%. So at that point, you'll have 11 cents worth of interest. It's a little bit more than previously. And so if you take the $1.10 that you had and the 11 cents, and you've now got $1.21 that you can reinvest for the next round 3. And when you put $1.21 in at 10% interest rates, you'll get 12.1 cents as interest. So you take your $1.21, your 12.1 cents, add them together, you get $1.33, and you put that in for the next round of investment, so on and so on and so on. So doing this takes a fair amount of time. And it's easier just to look at it on a spreadsheet. So I made a little spreadsheet. The interest rate of 10%. Start. So the first column has the has a number of rounds, or the round number, and the second column shows how much you're investing. So you start with a buck, then you got $1.10, $1.21, $1.33, and I let this go for about 16 rounds. So at the end of 16 rounds, you wind up with about $4.60 almost, starting from $1. So it's the power of compound interest. You can make more. You can make a lot more than what you initially started with. But yeah, you made a lot more. But at what point did you double your money? That's a question. And you doubled your money somewhere around cycle number 7 or so, right? You made $1.94, and you doubled that again, it seems, right? To get to about $4, somewhere around cycle 15. So if you look at that, the doubling seems to be occurring at a relatively fixed interval, at a fairly fixed rate there, right? And in this case, it seems to be doubling every 7 to 8 cycles or so. It's kind of interesting. Let's see what happens when we change the the interest rate percent. Let's see what happens. So here we've got 19% as opposed to 10%, and you got a lot more money. Or after 16 cycles, you're at $16 as opposed to $4.60. So let's look at the rate of doubling, right? The rate of doubling, 19%, is faster than 10%. We can tell just by looking at it, right? But it's still relatively constant. It seems to be doubling every 4 cycles or so, right? It seems to be doubling at cycle 4, cycle 8, cycle 12, and cycle 16. So around every 4 cycles or so, it's doubling. But still, it's doubling every 4 cycles. It's still relatively constant. So let's change the rate again, right? We'll increase it and see what happens. So let's do 29%. And as we can see, after 16 cycles at 29%, you've got almost $60, starting with $1. That's a lot more. And let's see what happens about the rate of doubling. The rate of doubling seems to still be relatively constant. It's doubling faster. It seems to be doubling every 2 to 3 periods instead of every 4 periods, or instead of 7 or 8 periods. But it's relatively constant. It's doing it every 2 to 3 periods or so. So what does that mean? Well, let's just plot this and see what it looks like. Here's the 10% rate. Here's the 19% rate in green, and the 29% rate in yellow. Okay. Let's put these all together and have a look at them. But when I look at these, the curves look kind of really similar to each other in a way, don't they? It's almost as though you can fit one curve into another curve, sort of, maybe. Let's remove all the lines. So let's remove the values and see what the curves look like in terms of shape. The blue looks like it could fit inside the green if it were just, smaller or something like that. So let's, it seems to be able to fit with a little bit of scaling. It fits very nicely. Do you think the green and the blue could fit in the yellow? I'm thinking it might. Yep, there you go. Perfect fit. So the curves look really similar because the curves are actually one great big curve. It's just a matter of scaling and extending for a longer period of time. So this is what compound interest really looks like. It's just one great big curve, and it's just where on the curve are you, right? So it's effectively just one big curve. Now, we've been talking about the rates of doubling and that the rate of doubling is relatively constant. So let me just do a quick recap of what we learned, right? With compound interest and exponentials, the rate of doubling is relatively constant. That constant may increase, but it's a relatively constant value for any particular fixed interest rate, right? The doubling period is based upon the interest rate. So as you increase the interest rate, the doubling period decreases, or the length of time it takes to double decreases. And we know that the compound interest rates are all effectively part of the same curve. Okay, that's a fair amount of information that you've learned already about compound interest. We've been talking about doubling and doubling periods, though, so let's have a look at what happens when you double. So let's just make a quick table here. Here we've got in the first column we've got the cycle number, right? And in the second column we've got a value that's doubling every cycle. Okay. And if you were to plot this, looks like this. Goes all the way up to 131,000. Note that that this is all part of the same compound interest rate curve, right? Because here, the interest rate itself is basically 100%. So this is all part of a larger curve, right? So when you look at this, one question that you might want to ask yourself is, when do you make the most money? And when do you make the most gains, right? Well, think about it. You make the most money on the last cycle, right? Because the last cycle you went from 65,000 to 131,000. That's a fair amount of money. And in fact, if you look at the last two cycles, that's responsible for basically 3/4 of all the gains. Okay. So where do you make the most gains? Well, it turns out you make the same gain every single cycle. So in the first cycle, by cycle 2, you made a gain of 100%. Went from cycle 1. Cycle 3, you made a gain of 100%. Went from cycle, you went from 2 to 4. At cycle 17, you went from 32,000 to 65,000. Effectively 100%. So your gains are actually relatively constant. This is a constant gain curve. Okay. And if you think about it, the people who understand this really well are bankers, because they deal with compound interest every day. Banks and bankers know compound interest. And the reason they have to know it is because they make a lot of money with it. And that's why they have a lot of money. Okay. Compound interest is an amazing tool. It's an amazing phenomena to understand and know about. Okay. So that's what an exponential is. Compound interest rates are basically exponentials. So rule 11, always keep a little cash on the side. And this is a fairly obvious rule if you think about it, because you never know when you come across a really good deal, right? Like you might have come across GameStop or MetaMaterials or the MetaMaterials Torchlight Preferred Shares. Maybe even Canberra Energy, while you're at it, right? They're an oil play and a clean energy play there. Who knows what you might come up with next, right? So it's good to have a little bit of cash on the side, because you can throw it at various opportunities that could have a big impact, right? So at this point, you increase your probability of success, because if any one of those takes off, then you're probably going to be doing okay. Rule 12, everything is supply and demand, right? Now, this is a fairly simple rule, right? Buy low, sell high, everyone knows that. But what is low? How do you know when the price is low? Okay, I'm saying low is when people don't want anything, right? And the thing that they don't want is actually hard to find. So what's high? Well, the price is high when everybody wants what you have, and what you have is really hard to find, elsewhere. So here's an example. In March of 2020, oil was in a special situation back then, right? We were in the middle of a pandemic. Nobody was driving or traveling. Okay, so demand was relatively low there. The oil storage facilities, all the oil tanks were full for the most part. And the price of oil dropped all the way down to negative $47 a barrel. People would pay you to take the oil off their hands. Pay you. Let that sink in. What's an example of a high oil price, right? Well, if you think about March of 2022, just very recently, vaccines are becoming, they've become readily available. People are starting to drive again. Travel's picking up. Nobody's pumping oil because, oil was a hard play at one point in time, right? I mean, you weren't sure because people weren't traveling. But so it takes a while to start up those rigs again. But the rigs are starting up. Anyway, on top of all this, war breaks out between Russia and the Ukraine. Russia is the third biggest oil producer, and you got war breaking out. Not great for oil prices. And oil prices spiked to over 120 bucks a barrel. Okay, that's when oil prices are high. So that's an example of a high price. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, these rules do often combine in real life. So rules 10 and 12 naturally combine a lot. Let's understand exponentials. And everything is supply and demand, because if you think about it, the money supply seems to be exponentially growing. And if everything's supply and demand, well, how much do you think your money will be worth in the future? So anyway, combining rules 10 and 12 usually creates something called inflation, when prices start heading upwards. And in some cases, it creates hyperinflation, as money supply increases exponentially. So some modern examples include Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and Weimar Germany, right? Here's a picture of a Zimbabwe $100 trillion note. They were available. They actually were real money. I'll leave it up to you to investigate hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and Weimar Germany. So anyway, I mentioned previously that there's three directions the price can go. So let's look at some stock prices and see what directions they went. So this is WTI crude. This is the price of oil in the last week or so. As you can see, it's gone down. So in this case, the price was going sideways to slightly downward, is what I'm saying. Okay. This is WTI crude over the course of a year. And over the course of a year, it went up. Not sideways and down, up. So time scale matters. Here you got Canberra Energy over the last week or so. And I would say that's a sideways movement to a downward movement. Canberra Energy again, looking back about a year. It's mostly headed downward, I think. And that's largely because of an attack by short hedge funds. But prior to the attack by short hedge funds, you had this huge price run-up. So that's the potential of Canberra Energy. This is why, it might be an interesting thing to keep an eye out about. This is MetaMaterials. Right. Actually, this is MetaMaterials Torchlight Preferred Shares. And over the last week, I'm saying it went sideways. It didn't really go up or down very much. It mostly went sideways. And if we look at it from all the time it was available to be traded, it went sideways at that point in time too. It's been going sideways a lot. Now this is MetaMaterials, and if we look at it overall in the last week or so, I'm willing to say that went sideways as well. Maybe slightly downward, but downward, sideways, about the same. This is the long-term MetaMaterials. And if we look at it in terms of the long-term, it went down. Okay, why did it go down? But prior to going down, it went up significantly. So what was going on there? MetaMaterials was shorted by a company called Carousel Capital, which pushed the price down significantly. And they pushed the price down all the way to less than $1.50 or so. Okay, and after that, it's been going sideways. But as you can see, there is a strong possibility that the price could head upwards dramatically if the shorts weren't there, or if the shorts get squeezed. You never know. The green arrow shows the potential of where MetaMaterials could go to. Finally, let's look at GameStop. GameStop ended the week at it ended Thursday at about 150. I'm willing to say that that is sideways to downward movement in price. If we look at it over the long term, it went sideways in the long term. For the most part of a year or so, it was going sideways. But in February of 2021, it had an epic move upwards. And could that move repeat? I think it could. So let's go over what my take on the price action is. In terms of GameStop specifically, the week before they announced a possible split via dividend, and that is likely to trap certain short hedge funds, I believe. And the shorts are likely maintaining the price because they're trying to keep the price stable as long as possible, I think, and that's basically hopium on their part. They're hoping that the longs will depart. They're hoping the longs will sell their shares. And they're also trying to find some sort of counter move to that split via dividend move that Ryan Cohen and GameStop presented them. Mostly they just want to find a way to save themselves. That's the main thing they're looking to do. Because it's possible we might have a Bear Stearns moment coming up where some small few hedge funds get sacrificed in the altar so that larger ones might survive. We'll see. MMTLP, again, my take on it is it went sideways. Basically, they announced some information, which was non-information. Basically, things are moving along as expected. So a lot of people who took that information that was released, a bunch of them panic sold, I think. So basically, anyone who panic sold or was planning to panic sell, they were already out. Which means that, there would be a large upward potential, but Metamaterials and Metamaterials Torchlight preferred shares, the MMTLP and MMAT family is currently undergoing a family feud. One side basically says that MMTLP is dangerous and new users should be discouraged from investing in it. The other side says, "Hey, look, it's a huge opportunity. Why are you trying to discourage people from, taking advantage of a huge possible opportunity?" Right? My take on it is that oil's at $90+ per barrel. There's 3.2 billion barrels of oil in the Oro Grande Basin, and MMTLP is going for $1.21 right now. You think the dividend's going to be higher than $2? If so, it's a buy, right? I'm thinking it could be significantly higher, of course, and there's a payout that I'm probably expecting somewhere between Q2 to Q4. I was thinking Q2 to Q3. Roller Pigeons was thinking Q3 to Q4. So, who knows? Maybe Q2 to Q4. So, MMAT. This has got, sideways, slightly downward movement in the last week or so. I think the shorts have no reason to leave, right? They can push the price down as much as they want with fake synthetic shares. And they'll keep pushing the price down until they can't. And I think the only way that they won't be able to push the price down is for MMTLP to release a dividend. So I think that'll be the catalyst for the shorts exiting MMAT, at which point the price will rise significantly higher. Canberra Energy, sideways to slightly down movement. Why? They recently got some SEC feedback. They've been trying to do some SEC filings. Those filings can now move forward. So, as a result, we expect the filings to be completed sometime around the April 15th to 22nd timeframe. In the meantime, Viking Energy has improved the business. Oil's at $90+ per barrel, as we mentioned. So, there's a pretty big upside potential is the way I'm looking at it, with very little downside possibilities. Could it go down? Sure. But I think the upside outweighs the downside. So the other thing is, once filings are complete, we're going to be expecting a Canberra Energy / Viking merger, right? And at that point, you have a very large upside potential. And that's my Friday update. So hopefully Hopefully this video finds you well, and I'm just going to say goodbye, and I'm going to end with the fact that I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. This information is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. Goodbye.